Hi guys, welcome to Delaware Studios. This is the second part of the employee directory application. In this part, we'll be setting up the content provider and implementing the circular review. The content provider is a structure built on top of the database. It helps in the create, read, update, and delete implementation. And we're going to actually implement the circular review, which will be taking effect on the floating action button, which ushers us to the employee editor activity, where employee details will be logged in. Let's get started in the second part, and I'll be heading straight to Android Studio, and I want you to move ahead with me. Catch you guys there. We'll be integrating the circular review. If you remember, we included this in the build Gradle, the dependency, the review layout, and we'll be implementing this layout right there in our application. We have to create another layout file called the activity editor, which will serve as the editor page where you can easily lock in the employee details, the name, first name, last name, title, post, and so on. Let's get to look at this activity editor. If you can see the preview, let me make this larger. So it's actually going to have this structure. It's a form where we have the name, title, department, and so on. A quick rundown on the code. We have the first parent tag called the review frame layout. This actually helps us with the circular review animation we are applying on the floating action button. And the coordinator layer follows, which wrap around the form with an ID of layout. We have a scroll view in case if you are using a smaller screen, so you won't have some aspect of the form cropped up. So that's why we need to use a scroll view. And inside the scroll view, you must use a linear layout to make your scroll view work. And we have that, which calls the context employee editor. I'll be showing you on how each input form actually is. We have the layout of the employee name. Can you see that highlighted from the preview, which houses the first name and the last name, with the text employee name and the first name, another linear layout right inside it, and that has the edit text of the name, first name, and the last name. We have for the employee title also another linear layout, and with the text view of employee title, and the edit text houses the title of the employee, followed by the department, and the edit text depicts the department of the employee. We have the city, which is the next one, and also the city where the employee is being assigned to. We have the phone number, and the email of the employee over here, and the gender, either male or female. So that's depicts all the functionality in our form, which serves as the editor. Cool. We'll be heading straight to Java class, and we'll be talking about the provider, which serves as the underlying structure built on top the Sqlite database. So you don't have to access the database directly. This can cause a lot of mishaps, whereby users can easily hack into your database, can wipe out all data from the database, or malicious content can be sent to the database. So we'll do a level of validation using the provider, and the provider will assist us to sort, and will also help us to read, to update, to delete data from the database. That's the essence of the provider which we created over here. This extends a content provider, and we have fields declared. The first field is the log messages, and we have the URI matcher code for the content URI of the employees table. We have for the all employees, that's the list of all employees on the database, and we have for a specific employee in the database. This is the second URI matcher code for the content URI for a single employee in the employees table. We have a static final URI matcher, which is the object to match a content URI to a corresponding code. The input passed into the constructor represents the code to return for the root URI. It's common to use no match as the input for this case, which we actually used here. And we have a static initializer. This is run the first time anything is called from this class. Whereby we have the content URI for the form, which will map to the integer code. This URI is used to provide access to multiple rows of the employees table. Can you see there where we call on the content authority, the path to the tables, which is the path employees, and the employees static final integer, which serves as the whole employees in the database. We have the second URI matcher, which serves for the ID. In the case we use the wildcard, which has this pound sign, which can be substituted for an integer. Definitely an ID will be an integer. Probably we want to call on an employee with an ID of 5. That's unique to that employee. So we build up the URI matcher of this particular scenario. We have the database helper object created because we will need to call the getWritable database method. And our onCreate instantiates the database object by passing the context as its parameter. If you extend the content provider for the first time, you will see a kind of probably error sign underneath. But once you click on this bulb, you implement all methods needed, and that will actually override up to 3 methods. The first will be the cursor query, this method. The second will be the insert method. The third will be the update method, while the fourth will be the delete method. We'll be talking about each one of them in this session. The first is the query. Fine, you have to query the database. You have to call data from the database, which takes some parameters. First of all, the URI, which is the path to the appropriate table. The projection, this always be the columns involved. Which columns are you calling? Are you calling specific columns, or are you calling all columns from the database? The selection argument, from which column are you pointing your selection at? And what is the argument you are passing as the value for the column called? And you can also sort the order, probably by a column in ascending or descending order. We're going to get the readable database. That's the essence of our DB helper object, which gets the readable database. And we also declare the cursor. Let's get to see how we're going to use all of them in the query method. We have to figure out if the URI matcher can match the URI to a specific code. Let's know which URI matcher we are pointing at. Is it the employees or the employee ID? Now we only have 2 URI matcher, which we've actually declared up here. The URI matcher, these 2, employees and employee ID. So we should understand what it stands for. If the URI matcher match the employees, that's you're calling all employees from the database, you're going to have the code this way. Call the database and you query the database. The first is the table name, the name of the table, definitely. The projection that you're using, that is the columns you're calling, the selection, the particular column you want to select on, and the argument you're passing. So we actually pass null to other aspects of the parameters, and your sort order. That builds up the query for all employees in the database. For the second case, which is the employee with ID, we're going to make our selection this way. And you see the selection now, which is the ID, which is the unique ID that was created, auto-incremented right there from the DB helper. This question mark is like is a wildcard, which actually substitutes for the argument value. You actually do it this way so that malicious content won't be injected into your database. Let's look at the selection args, which always come in a string array, and we use this string value of to actually convert an integer into a string. This is a Java method used on the URI, which passes the ID of the URI. That gives us the selection argument, which will be passed as the question mark into the selection. Now let's see how the query looks. We have the table name, we have the projection, the columns, the selection, which we've declared as the ID, the column ID we're using, and the selection argument, which is the URI, we converted to string. And we have our sort order. So that's for the unique ID. We'll break that up, and if none of the URI matcher matches the two we've discussed, you're going to throw an illegal argument exception that you can't find that particular URI. I think that is cool. We're going to set a notification URI on the cursor so that we'll be able to know what content URI the cursor was created for. If the data at this URI changes, then we know we need to update the cursor. What about we set the notification URI, we get the context just like this particular class, we get a content resolver, and we pass the URI as the third parameter. We always need to return a cursor in any query. That wraps that up for the query method. Let's get to look at the insert. Probably you are trying to add details, add values into your database. The case here will be for the employees, which is the URI matcher, and you're going to return an insert employee. Now we use a helper method to help us doing that, which gives rise to this method called insert employee. We're going to insert a new employee into the database with the given content values, and return the new content URI for that specific row in the database. You return the row inserted into the database, which takes two parameters, the URI and the content values. Now we need to check that the name is, we need to check this validation. We do validation on the provider. So this is just one validation, not where you're attaching data from. So we need to check if the name is not null, which stands for this check we're doing here. If first name equals to null, you throw an illegal exception. Employees requires a first name. The same thing goes for the last name, title, city, phone number, email, and for the gender, we check the gender if it's valid this time. If all those criteria are achieved, we get the writable database, not readable this time, because we are trying to write to the database with the DB helper object. Now let's see how we're going to insert the new employee with the given values. We call the insert method, pointing at the table name. We pass null as the second parameter and the values that was passed in. So that's going to insert that particular record into our database. Now, if the ID is -1, then the insertion failed. We're going to log an error and return null. That's if the ID is -1. Definitely you've not started, it should be from 0. Which caused the fail to insert new row. We're going to notify all listeners that the data has changed for the employee content URI. So that you won't have to refresh or restart the application before you can see that reflected on the UI. That's why we call this particular line the get content resolver. We notify the change that something has been triggered on the database. Now we need to return the new URI with the ID of the newly inserted row appended at the end of the query. We need to return this value. Now let's look at the update. This is when we update the data. Now we also need to check the URI matcher if it's for all employees or for a particular employee. We call the update employee method. We pass in the URI, the content value, what are you updating, and the selection, which column are you updating, and its arguments. Now for a particular employee, we're going to extract out the ID from the URI so we know which row to update. Selection will be ID equals to something, and selection argument will be the string array containing the actual ID. The selection at first will be ID equals to something, as I've said earlier, while its argument will be the value you're passing in, just the way we did for the insert. And we return the updated employee record. Cool. Which also use a helper method to do that. Whereby we see it over here, update employee. We need to check if the name is not null, as we did for the insert. And we check for the last name, the title, the department, city, phone and email, and even the gender. Cool. This time we get the Writable database and we update appropriately with all parameters set. Let's get to look at the delete. The delete gets the Writable database as well, and we check for the URI matcher if it's employees or employee with ID. If it's employees, so simple, we just lock in the selection and its argument. But if it's ID, just the same way we've done for the update and insert, we check for the entry ID, which is the unique ID, and which will be equals to something unknown yet, and the selection argument will replace the unknown data, which comes in an array, just the way we've done for the insert and update. And we return the deleted row, which is this. Return the number of rows deleted. Rather, you have to return that. And we need a get type. This get type is called a MIME type anyway. We also have for the two matcher, employees and ID. And we have the content list type, which is for the employee. And for the employee with ID, the content item type. We get to use this get type later on because of the project. Let's get to look at the employee editor. That ends our provider. Once you have a solid provider, I'm telling you, you're going to have a wonderful database-driven application. Let's get to look at the editor. We are going to actually move from the activity to the editor, because we're going to let's look at the employee activity first, because where we trigger the on-click listener, so the floating action button. We bind the floating action button here. We set up the FAB to open the employee editor. Let's get to see how we did that. We set on-click listener to the employee editor and override the on-click method. We call an intent, because for us to move to another activity, we always need an intent. The employee activity at present, which ushers to the employee editor class. We need to add the flags, flag activity no animation, and we need to put some extra, which will be unique to the two activity. The key is the extra rect, which actually sits in the employee editor. Let's quickly look at that, which is this. Cool. Back to the employee activity. We're going to create a rectangle and pass in the button as a parameter. Where do we get the button? It's from this object of the floating action button. Now, let's get to look at the create rectangle. This create rectangle, we have from the rectangle class, we instantiate and have an object. Whereby we get the drawing rect and we pass the object as a parameter. We get the parent and the offset descendant rectangle to my coordinates. And we pass the view and rectangle as the parameter. After that, we need to start the activity and pass the intent as a parameter. So if you notice, we have an extra we put there, which is the extra rectangle, which I showed earlier. Let's get to look at that from the employee editor, which starts as the package name, com.delaroy employee directory, back to activity, and we also create the rectangle and pass the button as a parameter, which we have right here. Cool. Let's get to look at the employee editor, where we are ushering to. We bind the extra rectangle over here to the rectangle class, and also bind the review layout, which we have from the activity editor XML. Let's get to look at that. This review layout, this ID over here, back to the employee editor, and also we bind the layout, which is the coordinator layout over here, which wraps around the form. We call the bundler to bind the extras that was passed to this activity, and we bind the view using the button knife. Now let's look at the animation that's actually make this review. It's a runnable, which actually runs as the background. It runs within a specific duration, within a specific period. It overrides the run method, and we have the animator, which calls the review layout, call the review, and now you're going to pass the coordinates, center X and Y, and the radius will begin activity at this point in time. We set the duration to 1000 milliseconds, and we add a listener to that, instantiating the animator listener adapter. On animation end, this is for build version SDK integer, that SDK version that is greater than or equals to 21. That's lollipop. It's going to get the window, set the status bar color, which will be from the theme get color and the color asset, and pass through as the last parameter there. The animator startup. You can also have the end of the animator, probably when you are using the up button back to your previous activity, but I don't need that. We just need it to usher into a new activity, so you get to see the review, circular review animation, declared before launching the employee editor activity. So that says it all, and that covers the review and the provider. I would like to break it there, and would like to talk about more details of this application when we'll be able to create our first employee right into our Sqlite database and get to look at that. Let's get our list view populated. We'll get to talk about that in the third part of this tutorial. Let's let's get to look at the manifest. We need to modify the manifest. We've added another activity, which is the employee editor. Over here, you need to log that into the application session of the manifest, which we've done. And at the same time, we need to register our provider with the name, which pointed to the provider class, and the authorities that we declared as the authority, and which is the package. And if we are exporting our provider to other application, you can decide to change the boolean to true. But for this scope, we are not. So that's why it's false. With these two implementation, you're going to have your provider set up, and you're going to have the employee editor integrated with the circular view. Thank you guys for hanging out with me throughout this second part. Don't go anywhere. The third part is coming, and we're going to actually register our first employee into our Sqlite database. Thank you guys. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Have a pleasant time. Bye-bye.